Welcome back to Fresh Outlook, everybody. Harry Potter actress Emma Watson did it, and so did the billionaire founder of Bitcoin Foundation. They stashed their cash offshore only to be outed in the so-called Panama Papers. The leaked documents illustrate how the rich hide their financial information. Let's say hello to our panel of experts. I'm joined today by Albert Goldson, David Goodman, and Bill Rosenberg. Bill, what do you make of this Panama Papers scandal?
I think it's a little bit much about something which is important but not really new. If we think back historically, Swiss banks have been doing the same thing for 100 years or more. I mean, the bottom line is people have been always parking money in what they considered a safe place and in a place where they had to pay less taxes. We even heard, to just bring up Donald Trump again, one of the reasons why he doesn't want to show his taxes, he says, is that, well, I always pay as little tax as I can, and as long as governments around the world set up mechanisms where people can do and practice tax avoidance because they don't require certain types of registries and so forth, we're going to continue to have it. Is it a good thing? No. Governments lose. The societies that should be receiving taxes don't get them. But again, I think that it's not as new as we think it is.
Albert, I think the key word that Bill struck upon there is avoidance. It isn't necessarily evasion. Keeping your money offshore can be completely legal.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you have what we call the stateless rich, those who aren't associated with any particular country. They have residences around the world, and they have their money in many different places, as long as you declare that you have X amount of dollars in particular areas. Also, it's for their own security and protection. So, in other words, if you have a different jurisdiction, if someone, your partner, decides to sue you in business or a personal relationship, a particular government wants to seize your assets, let's say under the RICO law, even if you aren't directly involved but somehow associated with someone, they could freeze your assets. So this is a very good protective mechanism so that you can protect your assets, and you still get tax benefits, but you're not hiding anything. It's just in a different jurisdiction.
Guys, we can talk all day long about Swiss bank accounts and what Panama represents and other offshore mechanisms, but I think it misses the bigger context here. We just talked about this in the last segment. The anti-establishment fury that has become like a wildfire on both the left and the right is further ignited by this issue of corruption, where you have people who represent the 0.001% of the United States population and other populations worldwide who are just taking full advantage of these things, while most working class stiffs are having trouble just paying their rent and so forth. So, I mean, in terms of the legality of the issue, I'll defer to you gentlemen in terms of what's legal, but in terms of the politics of it, it's corruption to the nth degree. And of course, my organization is very much concerned about the whole corruption of our political system, not so much by brown paper bags and suitcases full of cash being presented, but really how big money distorts the system, and this is just another example.
Interestingly enough, basically any working class stiff can set up their own offshore account with maybe $1,000, $2,000. They do it all the time. They have relatives overseas, or they travel, they go there, they don't want to be bothered with exchanging dollars. Wow. So they've had accounts set up for their families there, just as a matter of ease of transactions.
See, I think one of the bigger issues really here is in two different directions. One is what David's saying, how certain people are in a privileged position to know about it and be able to take advantage of it, which is the sort of the one percenters, okay, argument. But the second argument that I think is really persuasive in this whole issue is, where did the money come from and was it gotten legally? So what happens is, if a world leader, let's say a prime minister of a country who's making $200,000 a year and it's never made more than that, all of a sudden it's shown that he's got $15 million in a bank in Panama. Then the question is, how did he get that money? And what was the mechanism for that? Did it really involve actually corrupt behavior? And I think that's really probably the bigger issue. Mm-hmm. The one about the one percenters, sure, that's there. It's an unfairness that exists in society. But when people are able to be accepting bribes and doing things illegally, that's where I think this becomes even a bigger mushroom.
I think that you make a good point, and you don't have to even look overseas for culprits like that. Harry Reid has amassed a fortune. The Clintons have amassed a fortune. It'd be interesting to see if people like that surface in the Panama Papers. But people are devastated in this litigious society, Albert, by lawsuits. They can lose everything. Somebody like O.J. Simpson, for example, was able to lead a decent life after being sued civilly and losing on paper everything because of the state he lived in. He lived in Florida, which has a Homestead Act, which means they can't take your home. His money was protected in an annuity, which meant they couldn't take his income. So a lot of these devices and strategies are set up to protect people financially, which can be as devastating as being in prison.
Yeah, that's basically their insurance policy. And again, it's not only just for the 1%, but it's also for the working stiff, the middle class. Again, they are under, quite a number of stress as far as economically is concerned. But then again, you can set up an offshore account to protect your assets in case somebody decides to sue you or whatever the case might be. And just in terms of the problem globally, it is estimated, as far as hidden assets are concerned, it's approximately $7.6 trillion. Just to give you an idea, that's twice the size of the US budget. And some of the mechanisms that they're being used here in the United States, as far as the rich are concerned, is the US Treasury Department. They have a pilot program from this March until August, in which any sales in New York or Miami-Dade, if you purchase real estate for $3 million or more in cash with a corporation, then they must reveal who the owner is or who the primary beneficiaries are, because half the sales in those two areas have been under with secret accounts. So again, they're trying to look into those unusual type transactions. Where did they get $3 million from in cash to pay for those residences? Because a lot of foreigners and Americans hide that money in real estate.
Is that anybody's business, David, where you get the money to buy your house? We file our income taxes every year. Our checks are held by the government when we get paid each week. Can I make a transaction without the scrutiny of the federal government or the state government looking over my shoulder?
I'm sure you can. I think the issue, though, is really the broader issue of dark money, of secret funds, of hiding money. I mean, we're dealing with perception issues here as much as with issues of legality and regulatory behavior. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, those are the issues. I would imagine that there are very few Donald Trump voters who have Panama accounts.
They're not telling you.
Well, Donald Trump supporters, if they're rich, I would assume, do have asset protection. I think anybody who has been through a civil litigation process or a divorce knows about asset protection. If you don't, find out about it. It's important, which is why I know so much about it. But this is tough territory because of the litigious society we live in, right, Bill?
Well, I think, as Albert was saying, a lot of more common man people that do have some degree of affluence are doing this to protect themselves against spouses who may be suing them, or a business deal which could go south. I think that's where we have a lot of it. But I think the bigger story, the bigger numbers, at least in terms of individual cases, have to do with corruption. Okay, so if you add up the sum total of all the dentists who are going to get sued by their spouse in a divorce situation, certainly it's going to add up to a lot of money. But I think that the concern that I have is, number one, should the person who's trying to protect their assets really be able to do that? Is it really fair if a court has come in and mandated that there be a certain payment be made or a payoff be made? It's a U.S. court. The person lives in the U.S. They should be following U.S. laws, number one. And number two, if it was ill-gotten money through issues of crime or bribery or a form of real political, governmental, business corruption, being able to hide it in this way, I think, is very problematic.
The Obama administration actually did take action this week where they're asking banks to report shell corporations, or what appears to be a shell corporation. So this is part of, I imagine, the administration's crackdown on this hiding money.
Yeah, this is an extension of the creation of FACTA, created in 2010, in which the American government can ask foreign banks for the names of Americans who have accounts there. Part of it, of course, is for tax purposes. We're one of the very few countries, and wherever you go in the globe, whatever monies that you make is taxable. There are only few other countries that do that. One of those exceptions is basically China. You would be surprised. They have those laws on the books, but they haven't enforced them. And one of the other side to, let's say, the dark money or what have you, historically, governments have hidden money in various accounts throughout the world. Panama is getting a bad name because it's been in the news, but you have London, for example, is a big center for money that is dark money that's hidden either by criminals or terrorists or other governments. In other words, governments can park money in order to use that money to obtain resources and carry out foreign policy without the scrutiny of their respective
The state of Delaware, I
legislatures.
believe, in the United States also has a similar problem, which doesn't get talked about. It's not just overseas countries. Banking laws in the United States are many times regulated by state governments, and there's a lot of money that some people that would go after the Panama Papers would like to go after in the state of Delaware.
The problem is, if you get rid of these state regulations that give people protections and privacies, you become China, that has the laws, that scrutinizes every penny that people have. And it's why the people in China don't park in corporations, they hide it under their mattress.
All these draconian laws are coming about at an interesting time, is when so many of the governments basically have huge debt loads. They're looking for money. So this is a very good opportunity to apply those laws under, for example, Homeland Security, and under any sort of terrorist act, putting in a lot of financial laws under that umbrella for the purposes of collecting monies that they can't otherwise do as far as taxes or raising taxes are concerned. So that's a very clever mechanism to be able to do that.
The worst things done in this world to rob us of our liberty are done in the name of children and to fight terror. When we come back, we're going to have a look at wildfires and tornadoes. They both made news this week. Is climate change to blame? More on that after this.